Fleet Admiral Jonathan Hale stepped into the Galactic Senate Hall, his boots echoing against the polished obsidian floor. The chamber stretched out before him, a vast dome of gleaming metal and shifting holograms displaying the emblems of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Hale had been here before, but never had the air felt so thick with condescension and barely veiled hostility. He adjusted the cuffs of his pristine uniform and advanced toward the central platform, where the gathered alien leaders observed him like a curiosity rather than an equal. The Galactic Senate, a coalition of dominant extraterrestrial empires, had long kept humanity at arm's length. Officially, they recognized Earth as a sovereign power, but in practice, humanity remained an outsider, a species too young and too unpredictable for the established order to trust. Hale knew this meeting would be pivotal. It was not just another political discussion. It was an ultimatum wrapped in the language of diplomacy. Chancellor Zyvac of the Zelnari Dominion presided over the assembly, his elongated form draped in ceremonial black and gold robes. His luminous eyes, devoid of pupils, fixed on Hale with an air of mild amusement. Fleet Admiral Hale, Zyvac intoned, his voice smooth and measured. The humans come before us once more, extending their hand in peace. I confess, the persistence is almost admirable. Hale did not rise to the bait. He placed a small, unassuming data pad onto the Council's central projection dais. The Terran Federation presents its formal proposal, he stated, his tone even. The holographic display flickered to life, outlining Earth's terms: mutual trade agreements, cooperative defense initiatives, and a commitment to interstellar stability. It was, by every measure, a fair and generous offer. A rumbling laugh broke the silence. Grand Warlord Rithos of the Krogar Imperium leaned forward, his armored bulk making the dais tremble slightly. The Krogar were a warrior species, towering creatures of bony ridges and thick, sinewy muscles. Humanity speaks of stability, he scoffed, baring jagged teeth in what passed for a grin. Yet your kind has barely crawled from your home system. You speak as though you are our equals. Hale met the warlord's gaze without flinching. We speak as a species that has seen war, survived it, and learned from it, he said. We offer peace because we understand its value. Lord Counselor Veshtan of the Zorth Collective folded his clawed hands together. His species, arachnid in appearance, had a reputation for cunning politics and ruthless efficiency. Peace, yes, he mused. But at what cost? Humanity is ambitious. Unchecked, your kind spreads like wildfire. How long before your peace is simply another means of control? Hale exhaled slowly, suppressing his frustration. He had anticipated resistance, but their responses made it clear they had never considered Earth as anything more than an inconvenience. They were not truly evaluating the proposal. They were dismissing it outright. Chancellor Zyvac tapped a long, skeletal finger against his armrest. Let us not waste time, he said. The Senate will deliberate. A low hum filled the chamber as the council members activated their private voting interfaces. The process took less than a minute. Hale watched the holographic tally materialize above the dais. Unanimous rejection. Hale nodded once, as if he had expected nothing else. He reached for the data pad, shutting down the projection. Understood, he said. His voice remained steady, but a shift in his posture betrayed the tension coiling in his muscles. But understand this. Rejecting peace does not mean avoiding war. A ripple of amusement passed through the gathered leaders. You threaten us? Rithos growled, his massive form tensing, as if he might lunge across the dais. Hale held up a hand, cutting through the growing noise. A warning, nothing more. From the shadows near the chamber's entrance, Commander Elias Carter observed in silence. Unlike Hale, Carter was a soldier first, and his patience for diplomacy had long since worn thin. As Hale turned to leave, Carter fell into step beside him. That went about as well as expected, he muttered under his breath. They've made their choice, Hale replied, his voice quiet but firm. He tapped a discreet command into his wrist console. The message was brief, encoded, and absolute. Negotiations have failed. Initiate contingency Omega. Behind them, the Galactic Senate erupted into quiet laughter, secure in their belief that Earth had been put in its place. None of them realized they had just sealed the fate of their empires. Darkness enveloped the void, broken only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. The Krogar Imperium's capital world, Drakthal, hung in the abyss, its sprawling fortress cities glowing with the heat of industry. Orbiting the planet were dozens of warships, their hulls bristling with weapons, a silent testament to the Krogar's martial prowess. For centuries, they had ruled through conquest, unchallenged and unafraid. That arrogance would be their downfall. Admiral Darius Kane stood aboard the bridge of the ESS Revenant, eyes fixed on the tactical display hovering before him. The fleet was in position, silent, invisible to Krogar scanners thanks to Earth's latest generation of cloaking technology. The operation had been calculated to the smallest detail. There would be no warnings, no ultimatums. Earth had extended peace and been rebuffed. Now, it would strike with the cold precision of a predator. "All ships report ready," said Commander Tobias Rook, Kane's second-in-command. His voice carried the clipped efficiency of a man who had spent years in the shadows, orchestrating quiet wars long before open battle became necessary. Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. "Proceed." A single command transmitted. Through quantum relays unleash humanity's fury. From the darkness, Earth's fleet emerged. In less than a second, the silent void became a storm of fire and death. The first wave of railgun rounds, traveling at near-relativistic speeds, tore through the Krogar's outer defense platforms before their automated systems could even register an attack. Explosions blossomed across the orbital array, debris scattering like shattered glass. Then came the missiles, hundreds of them, weaving through space with adaptive guidance algorithms, bypassing shields and slamming into the hulls of enemy warships. The first Krogar dreadnought, Bloodfang, cracked apart as its reactor went critical, a miniature star blooming in its place. The response was sluggish. The Krogar had prepared for war, but not like this. Not an enemy that struck from the shadows with such ruthless efficiency. Alarm klaxons blared across the capital. But before their planetary defenses could fully engage, the second phase began. From the Revenant, squadrons of exosuited Marines launched toward the surface, their drop pods entering the atmosphere like a meteor shower. Captain Eric Vaughn led the charge, his HUD scrolling real-time battlefield updates. His squad was among the first to touch down, landing atop a Krogar command outpost. The moment the hatch blew open, Vaughn was already moving, plasma rifle raised. The first Krogar soldier barely had time to turn before Vaughn's shot took him in the throat, burning through flesh and armor alike. The rest of the squad followed, sweeping through the outpost with brutal efficiency. These were not untrained brutes. They were the best of humanity's special forces, hardened killers forged through decades of silent wars in the dark corners of the galaxy. The Krogar fought viciously, their sheer size and strength making them formidable opponents, but they were outmatched. Earth's soldiers were faster, their weapons more precise. Vaughn's team breached the War Council chamber within minutes, clearing the final barricade with synchronized efficiency. Grand Warlord Rithos, the self-proclaimed invincible leader of the Krogar, stood at the center, flanked by his elite guard. His crimson eyes burned with fury. "Cowards," he spat, gripping a massive blade that pulsed with energy. "You skulk in the shadows and call it war." Vaughn's rifle was steady. "No," he said. "We call it victory." Rithos roared and charged, but he never reached his target. Vaughn's shot struck between his eyes, and the warlord collapsed, his empire dying with him. Above, the last remnants of the Krogar fleet crumbled under Earth's relentless assault. The battle had lasted less than an hour. There were no survivors among the enemy. As Kane watched the wreckage drift through space, Rook approached. "Message from High Strategist Grays," he said. "The Zorth and Zelnari are in disarray. The leak worked. They're scrambling to cover their own treachery. Kane allowed himself a rare smirk. Good. Then let them choke on their own paranoia. Below, the Terran banner rose over the ruins of Drakthal. The first world had fallen. The galaxy would soon follow. The war had shifted. What had begun as a show of force on Drakthal had ignited a conflict the galaxy had never seen before. The established empires, once so sure of their dominance, scrambled to contain the wildfire that was humanity's military machine. But they had underestimated the one thing that set Earth apart from every other species: tactical adaptability. Admiral Darius Kane stood aboard the ESS Revenant, studying the real-time battle feeds from multiple fronts. Across the galactic theater, human fleets executed strikes with mathematical precision. The Zelnari Dominion had fortified their border worlds, expecting a traditional siege. Instead, they found their supply lines systematically severed, their fleet yards sabotaged by infiltration teams that moved like ghosts. The Zorth Collective had deployed vast drone swarms to overwhelm human forces with sheer numbers, only to watch in horror as their own networks were hijacked mid-battle, turning their mechanical legions against them. Commander Tobias Rook monitored the unfolding chaos from the tactical station, his fingers gliding over the console as he analyzed enemy response times. "They're still reacting like this is a conventional war," he noted. "They reinforce strongholds we don't intend to take, defend planets that aren't strategically relevant." Kane's gaze remained locked on the holographic display, because they're used to fighting wars of attrition. They think time is on their side. His expression hardened. "They don't realize we control the tempo." The next operation was already in motion. Task Force Epsilon, led by Captain Eric Vaughn, had infiltrated the Zelnari's Central Command Station, embedded deep within the nebula-rich system of Vathos Prime. The enemy had assumed the dense electromagnetic interference would make the station unbreachable. They had not accounted for Earth's ability to evolve. Vaughn moved through the dimly lit corridors, his squad silent as shadows. The Ghost Protocol technology, experimental cybernetic enhancements designed for deep infiltration, allowed them to blend seamlessly with their surroundings. To the Zelnari, they were invisible. The control room loomed ahead, its reinforced blast doors standing as the last line of defense. Vaughn signaled his team. Corporal Jensen placed a small charge against the door security panel. A controlled detonation sent a pulse through the system, locking the fail-safe mechanisms in an open position. The door slid apart without a sound. Inside, Zelnari officers turned in alarm, their elongated, bioluminescent bodies tensing in surprise. Vaughn didn't hesitate. His rifle fired once, an energy round piercing the skull of the highest-ranking official before anyone could react. The room erupted into chaos, but his team was already in position. Within seconds, every Zelnari in the chamber lay dead. Vaughn approached the primary interface, inserting a coded data spike. The station security network flickered, its defenses turning inward. Across the system, Zelnari ships abruptly lost coordination as their command relays collapsed. Vaughn keyed his comm, control secured. Beginning network disruption. On the bridge of the Revenant, Kane watched as the station's automated defenses turned against their own fleet. Orbital turrets redirected fire toward Zelnari's ships, creating confusion among their ranks. Rook grinned. "They're panicking. Their formations are breaking apart." Kane gave the order. Begin Phase 2. In the vastness of space, human warships emerged from their concealed positions, engines flaring as they launched a precise, calculated assault. Missile salvos streaked through the void, guided by AI-assisted targeting systems that adjusted in real time. Railgun rounds, fired from kinetic batteries, struck with pinpoint accuracy, exploiting the disarray sown by Vaughn's sabotage. The Zelnari fleet, once an unbreakable wall, shattered. Some tried to retreat, but humanity had anticipated this. Interdiction fields flickered to life, trapping enemy vessels in a web of gravitational distortions. Escape was no longer an option. Aboard his flagship, Chancellor Zyvac watched in horror as his carefully structured defenses crumbled. The humans had struck not with brute force, but with something far more dangerous, strategy. His advisors clamored for solutions, but there were none. For the first time in his long life, Zyvac knew fear. Back on the Revenant, Kane folded his arms as the last enemy ships were mopped up. They thought they could dictate the rules of engagement, he said. We just rewrote them. Rook exhaled, shaking his head. They still think this is a war for territory. They don't see the truth yet. Kane's expression darkened. They will. The void was alive with fire. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, debris scattering like shattered glass across the battlefield. This was a moment everything had been building toward. The last stand of the Galactic Senate's fractured coalition, the final gambit of those who had once dismissed humanity as insignificant. Now, they fought not for dominance, but for survival. Admiral Darius Kane stood at the center of the ESS Revenant's bridge, his expression unreadable as the largest fleet ever assembled by alien hands closed in around them. Thousands of ships, Zelnari dreadnoughts, Zorth war carriers, remnants of the Krogar's shattered armadas, all converge on a single point. The Terran fleet entrenched in the ruins of the Senate's homeworld, Arion Prime. Commander Tobias Rook monitored the tactical display, his hands gliding across the interface. They're coming in hard. No more holding back. Kane didn't look away from the chaos unfolding beyond the viewport. Good, he said. Neither are we. Across the fleet, orders were transmitted in perfect synchronization. Earth's forces had no numerical advantage, but numbers had never won wars. Strategy did. While the enemy moved in vast, lumbering formations, humanity struck like 1,000 blades from the dark. Stealth cruisers blinked in and out of visibility, launching precision strikes before vanishing again. Automated drone swarms, hijacked from the Zortha's own failing networks, turned against their former masters, tearing through their ranks with merciless efficiency. In the heart of the battle, Captain Eric Vaughn and his Marines made their final approach. Their target, the Galactic Senate's command station, still intact amidst the wreckage of Arion Prime's orbital ring. If they seized it, the war would end in a single stroke. Vaughn's drop pod slammed into the outer hull, molten metal cooling as the hatch burst open. He moved fast, plasma rifle raised, his team right behind him. The corridors were filled with resistance. Zelnari enforcers, Zorth assassins, the last remnants of a doomed empire. They fought with desperation, but desperation was not enough. Vaughn advanced, his squad cutting down opposition with brutal efficiency. Explosions rocked the station as Earth's fleet pounded the surface defenses, covering their approach. Every step forward was another nail in the coffin of the old order. In the Senate's inner sanctum, Chancellor Zyvac and his surviving council members watched in horror as the feed from their fleets turned into chaos. Their warships were breaking apart, their forces routed. The Krogar were gone, the Zorth leaderless, and now their own fortress was about to fall. Zyvac turned to his advisors. There must be a way. The blast doors behind them ruptured. Smoke and fire filled the chamber as Vaughn stepped through, his rifle aimed at the heart of the Galactic Senate. Silence fell. Zyvac stared at him, his luminous eyes wide with disbelief. You can't do this, he whispered. We are the foundation of civilization. Vaughn tilted his head slightly. Then consider this a rebuild. His trigger finger twitched. Plasma fire lanced through the chamber. It was over. On the Revenant, Kane received the final transmission. He watched as the last enemy ships either surrendered or were erased from existence. The Galactic Senate had fallen. The old galaxy was gone. Rook exhaled slowly. It's done. Kane's eyes remained on the battlefield, now littered with the wreckage of history. He knew the war was over. But peace? That was another battle entirely. Arion Prime burned. The once glistening capital of the Galactic Senate lay in ruin, its towering spires shattered, its great halls reduced to rubble. The streets were silent save for the distant hum of Terran dropships patrolling the smoldering remains. What had been the center of galactic power for centuries was now a graveyard, a stark monument to the consequences of hubris. Admiral Darius Kane stood at the edge of a ruined balcony overlooking the devastated cityscape, his uniform streaked with dust and blood. The battle was over, but its echoes remained. Behind him, Commander Tobias Rook approached, his boots crunching against broken glass. "The last of the resistance has been neutralized," Rook reported. "What's left of their leadership is in custody. Some are already asking for negotiations." His voice carried the faintest trace of amusement at the irony. Kane didn't turn. His gaze remained on the horizon, where the Terran flag now flew atop the remains of the Senate's central tower. "They didn't want negotiations when we offered them." "No," Rook admitted, "but fear changes things. Fear. It had been the weapon the old powers had wielded against weaker civilizations for centuries. Now, they felt it themselves." Kane had no illusions about what came next. Humanity had won the war, but wars were easy compared to what followed. Conquest was simple. Order was not. The doors behind them slid open, and Captain Eric Vaughn entered, still wearing the battle-worn armor from his assault on the Senate's last holdout. He saluted briefly before stepping forward. "Interrogations have begun," he said. "Zyvac and the others are still in shock." They weren't prepared for this kind of defeat. Kane finally turned, studying Vaughn for a long moment. "They thought we'd play by their rules," he said. "That even if we won, we'd restore their system. Let them negotiate terms." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "And are we—" Kane exhaled. No, the Galactic Senate was gone. The empires that had stood for thousands of years had fallen. What remained was a broken galaxy, leaderless and unstable. But instability was dangerous, and humanity could not afford another war. If the old order had been too blind to see peace as anything but weakness, then they would be given something they did understand: control. Across the city, Terran forces moved with precision, securing key locations, establishing governance. The transition would be swift. There would be no debates, no councils of indecisive bureaucrats. Earth had extended a hand, and when it was slapped away, it had taken the galaxy by the throat. Now, humanity would reshape it into something new. Rook folded his arms. The rest of the galaxy is watching. Some are terrified. Others, he glanced at Kane, a knowing look in his eyes, are wondering if they should resist. Kane nodded. They'll learn. A new galactic order had begun, one where peace was no longer a request. It was a mandate.